Well, hello and welcome to the channel. I'm glad you can join me for this. This is part 4 of our Tiger 1 early production by Academy in 1/35th scale. In this part, we'll be doing some dry brushing and be using panel liner, some chipping effects, mud effects, and our final reveal at the end. You're not going to want to miss that. So the first thing we're going to do is turn our attention to our tracks. So here we're going to be using some Testors enamel. This is flat steel, and it's a real nice color to show worn metal, and we're also going to use a little bit of thinner. So I like to use this brush here. It's a little worn, but it gets the job done. Now I do like to go ahead and wet the bristles a little bit. I find that dry brushing goes much easier if the bristles of the brush is just a little bit damp. Not sopping wet, of course, just a little damp. Then we're going to take and load the brush with a little bit of paint, and then we're going to dab most of that off. It's important to get most of that out of the brush. And then we'll just lightly go down and dry brush all these details here on our tracks. So these areas is the ones that's going to be making contact with the ground. And as you would expect, there won't be much rust or anything on that. And so we're going to lightly just dry brush that, and it really brings out all this raised detail here on our tracks. And that's not looking too bad, but we do have an area right here where we got a little bit too much of that flat steel color. So we'll just take and clean our brush real good and get all the paint out of it that we can. And then with it just slightly damp, we can kind of blend that away a little bit. And then we just continue on with our dry brushing. We're going to get the edges here of our guide teeth. And these guide teeth are going to make contact with the road wheels, and so they are going to have some worn edges on those too. So I'm kind of playing it safe here. I went ahead and made up 4 extra links. And painted those up just in case I run into an issue with my track being a little short. For some reason, once you paint these tracks and the road wheels and everything, sometimes you need a little bit more length. So now it's time for some panel liner. Now this is by Tamiya. This is the black panel liner, and I'm going to be using that along with this long bristle pointed brush. Now these long bristles will hold a lot of product, but the fine point on the brush is so much better than the one that comes with the panel liner. It'll help us target the areas that we want more accurately. And so using that really fine pointed brush, we can go ahead and start to bring out these little details here. And as you can see, we're able to actually get the panel liner right where we want it without too many big ugly spots that we're going to have to come back and clean up, later on. Now, since if you remember from our last video where we applied our decals, we coated the entire surface with the gloss clear, and that really helps the flow of our panel liner, and it'll also really help when it comes time to clean that up as well. And it will also help us bring out the detail here of our weld beads. And we're just going to put that on there. So when it comes to cleanup, all we got to use is a little bit of enamel thinner, since this panel liner is an enamel based product. And we can just kind of use a slightly damp clean brush and use it kind of like a eraser. Now you can also kind of blend the panel liner out, and that'll provide a little bit of extra shading or color differential there. But we just want to clean up everything that kind of looks out of place. And for these larger areas, like along these mud and dust guards, I'm using a cotton swab for that, or a Q-tip, if you like. It's just lightly soaked in a little bit of enamel thinner, and so that it will remove the panel liner. And you don't want to press too hard into those areas or you'll remove everything, and that's not what we want to do. Just make sure that you take a good look at the surface after you're done and you've removed any cotton fibers that may have been left behind, because that might ruin our paint later on. So once that's completely dried, I like to go ahead and seal that. And we're going to use this Model Master Acrylic Flat Clear to do that. So now it's time for a little bit of chipping. Here we're going to use antique nickel for that. Now it's just a little bit lighter than the gray that we used on our vehicle. And it is a water-based acrylic paint. And we're just going to thin that out a little bit. And here I'm preparing my chipping sponge. Now this is a synthetic sponge that I'm using, so if you're going to use a solvent-based paint, you're going to want to test that first to make sure that the solvent doesn't melt your synthetic sponge. That wouldn't be too good. So once I get the sponge kind of like I like it, a little rough around the edges, I guess, I'm ready to do my sponge chipping. So all we need to do is load that sponge with a little bit of our chipping paint. And we're going to get most of that out as much as we can. And we're going to blot it as well and remove nearly all of the paint that's in the sponge. We just want just a little bit in there. And then we can start applying our chips. Now, I'm just going to concentrate on these little corners and sharp edges on the model. As you can see here, now the secret to good chips is keep them as small as you possibly can. So, and then for me, you know, I tend to overdo that from time to time. So I'm really concentrating, trying to keep those really small. Now we don't want to forget about our road wheels and also our heat shields and all the other parts to the tank that we haven't attached yet. We don't want to forget about all those. Now, since we did do some pre-shading before we laid down our gray color, some of these areas are a little bit lighter, and our chipping color is too close to the color on those pre-shaded areas. So I'm just going to lighten it up some, and that will give us a little bit better contrast on those lighter areas. And we'll just go back in with the chipping sponge, and we're going to hit those areas up. That way the chipping will be noticeable. And once again, make sure that you unload as much paint as possible. We don't want any big blobs on our paint job here. And we'll just go ahead and put that in on those lighter areas. So while we're doing our chipping, we do want to make sure that we keep it where it makes sense, and that's around areas that the crew is going to be working on the vehicle, say loading those smoke discharge tubes. And you can also use it to add a little bit of extra detail to large flat surfaces, which I do also on this kit. And I'll also touch up those areas on the turret. And we'll also do this on our road wheels as well, and all the other little parts. Now, if you make a mistake and you get too much where you don't like it, keeping a slightly damp Q-tip or cotton swab around, and you can just wipe that right off, and then you just go right back to doing your chipping. Easy fix. So there's also going to be some edges that we just want to accentuate a little bit. And here I'm just going to come in with a fine tip brush and use that same chipping color and just highlight those edges that we kind of want to stand out. Now, no chipping is going to be complete without some scratches, so I've added a few scratches to the glacis. And here you see on that frontal armor, I'm going to put a little bit of a scratch there too. This helps add a little bit of visual interest to our model, and that's what we want. We want people's eyes to be drawn to it and look at these little extra areas. So now, of course, there's going to be chips that are much deeper, and those are going to be on the really sharp corners and edges. You don't want to kind of overdo this. Rule of thumb here is just to go with 20% or less of your previous chipping color and just darken in the very centers of those. So for that color, what we're using is the base Vallejo Panzer Gray. So now let's look at our exhaust. We need to do some rust on this, and so we're going to use this red rust. And this is a craft paint, acrylic, water-based, and also some burnt umber and a little bit of the warm brown, which is a much lighter color. And also, last but not least, some vanilla cream, and that's a really light color. But we're going to use these to create the underlying rust effect for our exhaust. So this is just sponge chipping all over again. And I do thin these craft paints out a little bit because they are kind of thick. So you can thin these out with water, just regular tap water, or you can also use your acrylic airbrush thinner for that as well, the water-based stuff. And we're just going to sponge that on, and we're using the burnt umber, which is the darkest one, first. And we don't even need to clean our sponge when we take and go to our next color, just blot most of it out. And I am going to go to our next to our lightest color, which is the warm brown. And we're just going to stipple that on as well. Stipple. Sponge. We're going to sponge that on as well. And it's going to add a little bit of visual texture to it there. So for our next color, we're going to go ahead and use the vanilla cream. Now this is a really, really light color. But it's just going to lay an under base color. I don't know if it's going to make sense to you, but it will in a second. I got a little bit too much there, but that's okay. These colors are going to be hidden under some later weathering. So now I'm going to go over top of that with our red rust. And we're just going to blot out most of that out of our chipping sponge. And we're just going to go over top of it. And that'll kind of act as a filter for it and subdue it. But I don't want to really tone it down too much. I just want to kind of filter that. So once those dry, it's time to go ahead and attach our exhaust. So I'm going to use the Tamiya thick cement for that, the orange top. This will allow us to be able to move our exhaust around a little bit and get our alignment correct. And for that, I'm going to use these heat shields to make sure that I've got the exhaust centered correctly. If I can get that heat shield in place. Of course, everything goes swimmingly well whenever you're trying to video something. But as you can see there, we just want to make sure that it's centered. It looks pretty good. Okay. And with our exhaust already attached, we can go ahead and place in our armored covers. And I use CA glue for that, since we're gluing painted surfaces to painted surfaces. So now we're getting ready to do a little bit of soot staining, and we're going to use this ivory black here. Now this is an oil paint, oil artist paint, placed on a piece of cardboard to soak out most of the linseed oil. And that'll really help speed up the drying process. And as a carrier, we're just going to use the Tester's enamel thinner for that. And we'll just kind of mix that up on the cardboard, and we will just go ahead and put that on. Right here, we're just putting it on the inside of the exhaust shields. And we'll go ahead and spread this pigment across the top edge here. Anywhere where the exhaust would be able to blow across this exhaust shield, we're going to put that on. And I think also a little bit down the back side of the exhaust shield as well. And we'll just add those pigments right in there. And once our pigments are in place, we can just come in with a clean brush and a little bit of enamel thinner and kind of blend these pigments. Kind of like that. That doesn't look too bad. Once that dries off, it's going to look pretty good. So we need to go ahead and add this exhaust soot to the exit portion of our exhaust. And again, it's just enamel thinner and the oil pigments. And we're just going to kind of paint this up, and then we'll do a little bit of blending with it. And we're going to want to do the surrounding area too, right around the edge of the deflector on top of the exhaust. And we're also going to do those areas right on the back of the vehicle, right where the exhaust is going to be deflected down towards it. And you can see I'm doing that right here. And we'll just blend the edges on that a little bit. And that should turn out pretty good. I kind of like the looks of that. That's looking nice. I'm also going to use that same mixture, but a little bit thinner, more watery-like. Well, more thinnery-like. But we're just going to go over these grilled sections here. Kind of color that in just a little bit. So we need a little bit of texture for our weathering. This is Vallejo thick mud. This is European. And we're going to use that to add a little bit of body to some of the areas on the vehicle. Here we're applying it to our drive sprockets. As you can see here, I've kind of put it on and pushed it down. And I'll show you how I did that. Now this is a water-based acrylic mud. So it's going to dry fairly quick. So we actually need to get this on as fast as we can. Push it down in the areas around those spokes on our final drive hub so that it kind of pushes out. And we'll just smooth this around. Just get the mud stuck on there. So you can see where our acrylic mud is starting to come out between the spokes. So we kind of want to just smooth this down closer to the hub where it looks more natural. Now we're going to do this process also with our idlers on the rear of the hull as well. So for our mud effects, we're going to be using these AK Interactive products. And so the first one's going to be Earth Effects. Now it's the lightest color. And then next up is going to be Dark Mud. And it is the medium color. And then last but not least, we might use Fresh Mud, which is the darkest of all. I don't know if I'm going to use it yet or not. We'll see how we go. Now these are enamel-based products, and we're going to start with this middle color here to start off our weathering process. So I have mixed this about 50-50 because it is a wash. And these products are really thick, so you do need to thin these down. And since they are an enamel product, you can just use regular enamel thinner to thin that down. I'm just kind of painting in these areas underneath the sponson and above the road wheels. They're not going to really be seen by the time we get the tracks on and everything, but we don't want any gray body areas showing through there. So we're going to go ahead and color that up, and we'll do the rear of the vehicle as well as the bottom, because that's going to be muddy too. And then we'll go ahead and do the front of the vehicle as well. And we're going to go ahead and cover our acrylic mud with this product. That's going to give us our base color of our mud right there. Now with our mud already applied and kind of dry, that's about as far as we need to go right now without our tracks attached. So we just want to use a little bit of CA glue here. I'm just going to put a little bit on the sprocket as the anchor point, and then we're just going to fit our tracks onto our sprocket. and making sure that it's firmly pressed down onto our drive sprockets. We can slightly rotate it right away from our road wheels, and with a little bit of CA glue we will take and attach the sprockets to the bottom of these road wheels, and then just rotate it and make sure that we got good contact there on our road wheels, and that'll attach the bottom section of our track. And now we can just slide in the top section of track and get it in position, and we'll attach that with just a little bit of CA glue again. And here I'm just going to use my tweezers to make sure everything is pulled up nice and tight. Since this is medium CA glue, we've got just a couple of seconds to work with it. Now, we did have a little boo-boo here, as you could probably see. I broke the track. Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that happens. A little bit of CA glue and we'll just fix that right up. Now, with our tracks firmly attached, we're going to keep going with the CA glue here. And mainly because there's a little bit of paint on the surface there. So we want it to be nice and firm. We're going to attach our road wheels. So we'll do the last double set and get those pressed into place. And then we'll put the outer road wheels on. We really want to make sure that these are nice and straight. We don't want any road wheels that are kind of at a cant, because that wouldn't look too good for us there. So with our road wheels and our tracks all on, we can go ahead and attach these rear fender extensions or mud guards. And I'm going to use a little bit of CA glue for those as well. And we want to make sure we get those pressed into place. And because of the angle here, I'm just going to use a toothpick here or a cocktail stick and press it into place there. Make sure we got good contact there. And while we're gluing things on, we're going to go ahead and attach these spare track sections here to the side of the turret. A little bit of CA glue, and we want to be really careful and make sure that we get these placed exactly where we want them. Kind of line it up here on the bracket and then press it down, and we're pretty much done. So now all we got to do is attach all the others. There's a total of 8, I think, that we need to do here. And that's going to get us ready for doing the rest of our weathering. Now this is the Earth Effects, the lightest color, and it is a enamel base wash. And I have mixed this about 50-50 with enamel thinner. And we're just going to take and dab and brush that on. We're going to do the center of our road wheels here and get those kind of muddied up there. And we're also going to go ahead and coat our idler here on the rear of the hull and the front drive sprocket as well. Now we're going to go ahead and do the upper portion of the vehicle, the turret, and also the top of the hull. Here I'm just using a little bit of enamel thinner, and we're just going to lay down a little coat. Just needs to be slightly wet. And the reason why I do this is that when we apply our pigments, as the enamel thinner runs out across the surface, it can leave tide marks. Whereas if we lay down some enamel thinner and the surface is already slightly wet, we can eliminate having those tide marks run across the surface. And here we're going to use the same principle on the large surface of the top of the turret. Just laying down that enamel thinner. Just want it wet so that we don't have too many tide marks. And then we'll just come in and add our pigments. Just make sure we get enough product on there. And on the front portion of the roof there where it's sloped, we'll come back in and do some streaks. So here we're going to work on vertical streaks. So I am, once again, loading it up with a little bit of enamel thinner. And then we'll just come back in, add some pigment to it. We need enough of this product so that we can actually do some streaking there. And using a clean wide brush, just slightly damp, we can take and just draw this in a vertical motion, because that's where, or the way, water runs. So it's going to run down. So we're just going to take and streak this. Now, as we go along and it starts to dry a little bit more, we can get a little bit more aggressive with it. You want to be careful about how that product may collect around the bottom edge. As you can see here, I am pulling it up a little bit, and then turning the brush and using the thinner profile, we'll just go ahead and clean some areas, and that'll help us with our streaking. As you can see, it is cleaning it up here and a couple of little areas. And once this dries a little bit, we'll be able to see a lot more of what our streaking effects have accomplished. And we're going to apply the same technique to all the vertical surfaces. And we're going to do the same with the hull of the vehicle as well. Just make sure that you do your streaking in the same direction that water runs off. Now I'm using the same product again here to add mud to our tracks. And we want all of this to be tied in together so that it all looks really unison. I think that's the word I'm looking for. We're just tying all of our weathering effects together here, and we save the tracks for last because we may need to apply more than one coat to kind of get the intensity that we need. And of course, we don't want to forget about the tire portions of our road wheels. Everything needs to kind of be all part of the same family here. So now, when we're using different colors, sometimes we end up with a hard line. And here I'm just using a really clean brush with some fairly stiff bristles. And I'm just using a stippling motion to kind of blur out any hard edges that we got there between our streaking effects from our lighter color and the mud effects from our darker color. And we're going to use this technique to take care of also the road wheels, which is another area where it's also very prominent. And we just want to soften those edges in. So now we kind of need some rust effects, and I'm going to use these Vallejo dry pigments for that. And this is rust, old rust, brown oxide, and new rust. Boy, that's a mouthful. But anyway, we're going to use these pigments and water as a carrier for them. And we're going to start working on our spare tracks. So spare tracks are up out of the mud here on the turret itself. And I'm just going to start with the darkest color, the old rust. And we're just going to use water and dip it in a little bit of pigment. As you can see, I've put the pigments in a little color palette here. Makes them easier to work with. And we're just kind of brushing these on. Now it's really hard to see what you've got going on until the water evaporates. And once they dry out a little bit, you can actually see what colors you've got going on. And then I start in with the rust color, and we're just going to apply that in a little bit smaller areas than what we had before. And that's going to give us a little bit of color variation, which was going to look pretty decent, I think, in the end. Now, since these are still wet, it is a little hard to see what's going on, but you can see where it's starting to dry, that these colors are starting to reveal themselves. One word of caution is when using these pigments, I found that if you go back over them with a, say you try to seal them in with a clear coat of some kind, then they pretty much fade completely away. So we're not going to do that. We're going to leave these pretty much raw when we get them all done. And so next up, we're going to use a little bit of the brown oxide. And again, just using water as a carrier. And I'm just going to outline some edges and say the upward exposed surfaces of the guide teeth there. And that's just to give just a little bit of fresher rust appearance there, if that's making any sense to you. Usually the edges of exposed metal are going to collect rust a lot faster. And you can see here the effect that we have started to achieve here, and it's not looking too bad. I think we're in pretty good shape here. So once this fully dries, the colors are really going to come out. Another product that I like to use is AK Interactive Streaking Grime here. And we're going to use this to simulate some fuel spills. So as you look at these grill doors here, these forward caps are for the fuel tanks, and the one behind it on that metal plate is for the radiators. So I'm just going to do the fuel spills. So using the streaking grime, we're just going to add in little bitty dots and areas where fuel most likely is going to be spilled onto the upper deck of the vehicle. So now we're going to use a little bit of graphite. Now this is an artist refill cartridge. I think it's a B5 graphite. It's a soft grade. Now you can still use like a number 2 pencil, whatever you have laying around. And I'm just going to use these on our exposed surfaces here of our track links. Now, if you remember, we did do the dry brushing on them. And here we're just going to use the graphite to help polish that area a little bit. And make sure that you get around the edges of the tracks, because those are the ones that do all the sliding as the vehicle turns. So that's going to be well polished as well. And then I add a little bit of reflection when the light hits it, and that'll help bring the model more to life. We're also going to do these grab handles here on the engine deck, and I will go in and do the grab handles that are also on the hatches on the turret as well. So now it's time to go ahead and make an antenna. So I'm going to use a little T-light here and a little piece of sprue left over from building the kit, and we're just going to heat it up. Now try not to get it as close to the flame as I did here, otherwise you'll just get that black mark. So we just want to heat up the plastic, and I start pulling it slowly, and then I can accelerate, and that'll give us a nice even piece of stretched sprue, which we're going to use as the antenna. And we just need to cut that to length. And of course we need to paint it up, and what other color than German Panzer Gray. So I'm just using this straight out of the bottle, and we'll just go ahead and paint that and let it dry, and then we'll be able to attach it to the vehicle with a little bit of CA glue. I'm just going to dip the antenna right into it, and then we're just going to place it right on top of the antenna base. Now this is medium CA glue, so we have a couple of seconds, and then it'll be stuck really good. So we need to go ahead and make sure that we get it as straight as we can. And so here we are with the finished vehicle. I hope you guys have enjoyed this build. I know I have. So there are some things that I did include that's not in the video. We added a little bit of that rust pigment to our tools. Of course, they would get a little bit rusty. And there was a couple of improvements that we did. We did build the bracket for the front of the vehicle for our spare tracks, as well as the clamps for our FIFO filter air tubes. And of course the aftermarket tracks that we added to this kit. I think they add a whole lot more to it than the rubber band style tracks would provide for the overall look. But of course there are plenty of options for aftermarket tracks. It really comes down to how much money you really want to spend on that. The metal tracks are really nice, but they are pretty expensive as well. And I do have an issue with spending more money on tracks than I spend on the kit. But that's just me. If that's your thing, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And there was one other addition that we added to the kit, and that was the screen photo etch that we put over top of the engine deck grills. And I highly recommend adding that to the kit. It does look really nice on it. The bottom line is, if you're happy with the kit, then that's all that really matters. Because that's what we do. We build these kits for us. And of course there are always things that we could do a little bit better. And with every build, I learn different things and new things. And I look to incorporate those in my newer builds, as there are more to come. Now, as for the kit, I think Academy did a pretty good job on this kit. It's really got a lot of potential, and it all depends upon your skill level. But I don't think anybody will have any real trouble with it. I think this kit would fit beginners as well as more experienced modelers. And like I say, the potential here to do all kinds of things with this kit, it has plenty there for any modeler to work with. So if you are new to the channel and you like what you see here, I'd appreciate it if you go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified when I post a new video. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd also appreciate if I could get a little like out of you. Little plug for the channel. As always, special thanks to all my subscribers. It's because of you guys that I continue to post these videos. And if you have a comment, I would love to hear from you. So, till next time, you guys stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.